Ever wonder why we relate and connect to stories around us?
Welcome to the DNA Podcast, a show where we discuss books, movies, and entertainment that help us understand who we really are.
I'm Dakota.
And I'm Annabella.
Let's dive into our DNA.
I feel like I'm feeling a little exposed, a little vulnerable.
A little vulnerable.
After I wanted to experiment this time around because I was like, you know what happens if I just watch it and then go straight into the podcast? Will I immediately regret it?
This was a rough movie to test that out.
Oh yeah, no. See, that's the problem. Ignorance is bliss because I had no idea,
dude.
And then, yeah,
I loved this movie. Watching it, I watched it for the first and I guess only time. I guess I only saw it once in high school. And
oh really? That's a while ago.
Yeah. And I fell in love with it. I really did. And so when we were talking about other movies or things to do for next time, and you recommended Dead Poets Society, I was like, oh my gosh, I love that movie. Robin Williams, love of my life, miss him so much. I
R.I.P.
forgot, I think, a good 60% of the actual plot. I felt like I watched it for the first time again, and it was not a pretty sight, I'll tell you that right now.
No, so we texted a little bit about it, but literally the second certain instances occurred,
yes,
all of the memories started flooding back for me, and I was like, oh my god, oh my god.
It's happening.
Everybody stay calm, stay fucking calm. No, really, that's how I felt. Anyway, well, we're killing it with these cold opens.
I know.
I like them.
Welcome again to another episode of the DNA Podcast. We're so happy to have you here on episode 7, I think.
7.
7.
Gross. Yeah.
We're almost to 10 episodes. That's crazy. But, we're doing it.
What's going to happen? I had this thought the other day where I was like, what's going to happen when we hit our 100th episode?
We should do it in a studio. Somehow figure it out. There's podcast studios I know in the Lehigh Valley there's a bunch that you can rent for an hour rate. But I feel like we should celebrate.
What?
Yeah.
I didn't even know that was a thing.
And there's probably even some elsewhere. But yeah, the Lehigh Valley's had a couple. I only know of 2 right now, which I feel like there's probably more studios.
I'm shook.
Yeah. So maybe we'll do that
I
to celebrate.
genuinely had no idea. Yeah. Or we do our live podcast.
Oh, then the world will know how many times we say and how many strokes you get. How many times I misquote things or refer to Adam Sandler when he was not even remotely close to the movie.
No, yeah. That was good. You were like, it's Waterboy. I was like, nope, no, that's not
the
even.
Second, the second I said it, I was like, something's wrong. Why did that not?
But if you listen to the original audio, I was literally like, because in my brain I knew exactly what you meant, but you said Adam Sandler, and I was like, she's so wrong right now, but it's okay. Yep. I just kept
you just let me continue to embarrass myself. That's a good friend. Yeah. That's a good friend. So, well, anyway, speaking of embarrassing ourselves, this one that we're talking today, Dead Poets Society, made us both ugly cry. And I mean, Anna, you're no stranger to crying on the podcast. That's just a given.
You know how people have rapping names? Mine would be like Little Crybaby or something.
Little Crybaby. Oh my god.
Because I just cry. It's default.
Well, I guess I joined the club for this episode because I ugly cried. I got photo evidence of it. So.
Oh yeah. We'll post that on the podcast page as well because they're a sight to see. They truly are. Yeah.
Makes you really connect with us. So anyway.
It really does.
Yeah. Anyway, welcome again. So today we're talking about the Dead Poets Society.
Dead Poets Society is a 1989 American drama film written by Tom Schulman, directed by Peter Weir, and starring Robin Williams, Robert Sean Leonard, and Ethan Hawke.
Set in 1959 at the conservative Vermont boarding school called Welton Academy, it tells the story of an English teacher who inspires his students through his teaching of poetry. Maverick teacher John Keating uses poetry to embolden his boarding school students to new heights of self-expression.
Love it. Love it.
Oh, and also this was an Oscar winner for Best Screenplay, which I think is extremely well-deserved.
Yes. 10 out of 10. The acting in this, especially some of those young boys,
oh yeah,
GTFO, man.
I
literally, the one boy though, the main character Neil, literally looks like young Ace Ventura, Pet Detective.
Jim Carrey.
Jim Carrey.
You mean Adam Sandler?
Looks like yeah, Adam Sandler. No, literally, does he not? Neil looks like a baby Jim Carrey, in my opinion.
Yeah,
right?
a little bit. Well, I think I know the actor who plays Neil is Robert Sean Leonard. I think he was in House. He's in one of those types of shows. I think that was the one that he was in. I can't remember, but whatever it was, I've seen him in before. And so as soon as I saw Baby him, I was like, oh my God. And then I knew the other guy whose name is Todd, who is like the super shy one. I didn't realize that was Ethan Hawke. So the more I looked at him, I was like, why does this kid look so familiar? And then I looked it up and I was like, it's Ethan Hawke. But obviously, the one thing that I knew from watching this back in high school was good old Robin Williams, R.I.P.
Oh, yeah.
Literally anything I see of him, I probably should have known just because it's Robin Williams that I was going to get emotional with this movie. There's just something about him and this character, I think, I actually was just reading when I was writing this production note thingy that we always read from. Robin Williams was really drawn to this role because when he read John Keating's, which is the teacher, the character, he said he was so drawn to the character because it was the teacher he wished he always had. And I was like, oh. And I think it is. I think.
So the reason why I love poetry so much is because I had a teacher growing up. Her name was Mrs. Hensel. And she was so passionate about Edgar Allan Poe. So passionate.
That's your shit.
Now my favorite. Yeah, he's my favorite author because of her. And she would literally come in every single year. She never missed a year, dressed up as Annabelle Lee.
Oh my God.
Every year. Yeah. Like, she was just so cool. And she was so passionate about, like, the arts and, like, she was just so cool. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So she was kind of like that teacher for me. She didn't obviously, like, have that emotional aspect that Robin Williams did. Yeah. But, she was that teacher that made me, like, be like, what's poetry? Oh. And then it's been history ever since. Yeah.
Oh, man. I love that. I feel like I don't want to jump ahead, but I do think that at some point we should talk about teachers and the influence that they have on us, impacts that they have on us. But before we just dive right in, I have like a little bit of there's multiple storylines in this. Like there's multiple characters, each of which have their own things. I mean, I'm not going to dive into every single one of them. But I just wanted to kind of cover the ground a little bit more. Painfully shy Todd Anderson, this is Ethan Hawke's character, has been sent to the school where his popular older brother was valedictorian. I didn't know that, but I guess it's a fun little fact. His roommate, Neil Perry, although exceedingly bright and popular, is very much under the thumb of his overbearing father. The two, along with their other friends, meet Professor Keating, their new English teacher, who tells them about the Dead Poets Society and encourages them to go against the status quo. And each does so in his own way and changed for life.
Yeah, and there's so many like different plot twists and obstacles throughout this entire movie that like I think really make it what it is. The opening 2 seconds of the film, you just see a pillar of I think it was like a mass or possibly Catholic mass, whatever. It looks like the start of a religious ceremony, and the students are all like walking in, and each of the students that are processing in, some of them are holding these like pillars, and the first note of the first second of the scene slams down, and it's a banner that says tradition.
Yeah.
And you're set with a tone the first 10 seconds of the film that it's like, there are 4 pillars. It's tradition, honor, discipline, excellence. And like you see kids hugging their parents goodbye, like weeping, and you're just like, where the fuck are they going?
Me when I went into sales, but it's fine.
Yeah. No, I really was like, okay, we're setting a scene here. I was like, all right, we're saying goodbye. We're never gonna see our families again, like, or like whatever. Like, it seemed as if a lot of the kids there were not there by choice, and a lot of the kids either maybe didn't want to go there, or the thought of going there, like having that expectation of those 4 pillars. It was just like you enter this film and it's just like boom, and it's like a heaviness that's just right there in the first beginning. You're like, oh
yeah,
all right, what are we in here? What are we in here for?
Yep. So first thing I would like to say is I feel like my little film student is so proud of my little roomie for analyzing that, because that made me so happy hearing that, because that's exactly what I was going to say. And I do think that those 4 pillars do kind of tie in different ways, whether it's like, what does this film say about tradition, honor, discipline, and excellence? And then like, how do you go against it? Because I really do think that, as I mentioned, like each character, goes against the status quo in their own way and kind of redefines what it means to have like honor, and then, going against discipline and structure. And I mean, one of the things too, like just moving on further in the film, is like you have these two roommates, like Neil and Todd, and could not be more opposite. I mean, Todd, like I had said, is just very like quiet. He's very studious, rule follower. He's very structured and doesn't really have a voice at all. And then you have somebody like Neil, who is his roommate, who has been there before, kind of knows the ropes. He's kind of just happy to, be that guy that's getting people together, more outgoing. None of the characters I would say are really free thinkers at that point, but he is probably one of the most free thinking characters, I would say, in the sense that he knows what he wants, but he doesn't ever actually do anything about it.
I think that has to do with the fact that all of the other students came from family lineages that went to the academy as well. Whereas Neil is this outlier who, like, his family didn't come from money. His family, like, worked super hard to even get him into the school. So I think that that's why off the bat, he's just a little bit more different.
Yeah, and you can see this stark contrast between the structured path of Neil and then with Todd, it's more so just like the societal expectation that is his structure of, hey, we need you to succeed. And like his father constantly puts this pressure on him of like, I didn't have the opportunities that you have, and kind of basically writing his future for him. Because of that, like, he doesn't have his own voice, even though I think on the surface he seems like he has it all. Like, he's like this really cool, outgoing guy who likes to get people together and everything. But it doesn't really have, I guess you don't really realize that they don't have a voice until Mr. Keating is introduced and completely reforms the entire way of, one, teaching in general, but two, how to learn,
Right. And I think that it happens that exact way because of the fact that you can just see, because in the beginning it shows the kids quickly in other classes and they are dull.
Well, like, boring stuff.
Students, turn to page 247 of the English translation. Like, it's just
learning Latin.
The kids are miserable.
Yeah.
Right. And so, like, obviously they don't have a voice there. And so Mr. Keating is their English teacher, like Dakota said. And off the bat, day one, he walks into the room whistling. Like, what? He's not even in, like, what? And then walks out the room, whistles. And the kids are all like, where the fuck is what? Where's he going? And he's like, well, come on, aren't you going to follow? And the kids are like, I guess. Okay. And they like, half of them don't even get up. They're like, what are we going to get yelled at? Like,
do we take our books? What's going on? Like,
yeah. So they follow Mr. Keating into the hallway. And then the main whole theme of this movie is set day one of his class. And he's showing them the lineages of students prior and the successful men prior and all this stuff. And he started off with a piece of poetry that stuck with me that ties back to the entire theme of Carpe Diem. Seize the day, obviously. And it says, gather ye roses while ye may. That's just the first line of it. I didn't write the whole quote. But essentially he's telling them, like, live your life while you can, because you are not these people in the pictures yet. And if there's one thing that these people in the photos who all went here before would tell you is to Carpe Diem, seize the day, live your life. Gather ye roses while you may, because the rest of it said, like, from was once a blooming flower will be dead one day, or something like that.
Right.
Yeah. So it was kind of this tone of like, and the kids were all scared because they're looking at like these other graduating class photos, and he's acting ghostly, like they're telling him Carpe Diem.
Yeah, he's like whispering, pretending to be on and stuff. So
right. So the kids are just like shocked. Day one with Mr. Keating, attention has been grabbed. They're on the train. They didn't even stay at the train station. They got on. They closed the door. They're like, "Oh, we're going."
Yeah. And I love the way that, Mr. Keating's character was written, and I also love the way that Robin Williams portrayed him, because he's very so much like a rule breaker, but not like in a destructive way. He just constantly redefines what it means to teach and to learn and to live. And one of the other things that he does, like, I don't know if it's not the first day, it's like one of the very first days, is he says we constantly have to look things in a different way. And he says that by standing up on the desk as everybody else is sitting on the desk, and everyone's like, what is this psychopath doing? Like, what is he doing? And he's challenging them, and this is what I was trying to like connect a little bit earlier to those 4 pillars of going against the tradition, but in the same way, like honoring yourself and then freeing yourself from that discipline.
Yes.
And then all in, like, to just tie it in, like, you can still achieve excellence. You can have like an excellent life. You just don't have to go with the grain. And
yes,
I think, I forget if I'm paraphrasing this or if this is an actual quote. Your opinion is unique even if it doesn't feel that way. So
right.
he, has them read like the poetry book. And it seems like it's going to be similar to those earlier scenes, like you were saying, like, turn to page blah 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 of what it means to write a poem and blah 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 blah. And then he's like, they read it and it's like, rule number 1, blah blah blah. Rule number 2, you have to look at it through this. This is how you do it. This is how you write an excellent poem. And then Mr. Keating says, great, rip it out.
Yes.
And they're like,
yes, correct.
And then the goody two shoes of the class, which probably would have been me if I'm being honest, was like, what? And it's like, it's not the Bible. You're not going to go to hell for it. Like, rip it out. Like, do it. Rip it out.
Yeah.
So just constantly redefining what it means to think outside the box and be comfortable with breaking the rules.
Yeah.
What would you do if you were in a school? I mean, you went to a Catholic school, high school?
I did. Yeah.
All
literally,
whole life.
Literally pre-K.
Yeah.
To fucking college.
Well,
Catholic and masters. Catholic.
That's true. So what would you do if a nun just like got up on the table and was like, rip out the pages? No, I'm not saying the Bible. That would be a little sacrilegious, I think. But how would you react to that? Would you be like, fuck yeah, I'm ripping it out? Or would you be like, huh?
Okay, so you know what? I have kind of like I have had 2 teachers that were like my Robin Williams. Thank God, because they've made me who I am. So for one, I think that, and I wrote this down, when you go to such a structured school your whole life and it's literally just like the same, blah, 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 you can tell as much as the boys were scared at first, they were so badly craving that weird random defiance that Robin Williams was doing. And so like you can see them being hesitant, but also automatically being so drawn in.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So back to what you're saying, like that one teacher who would dress up like Annabelle or like my 6th grade teacher, Miss Terragrosa, shout out to you. You literally are the reason I'm here today. Oh. Both of those 2 teachers were exactly that. Miss Terragrosa like wasn't just a teacher. She was like our mom. And she like just did so many other and more extra things than any teacher ever in the world would have done for us. And so when it came to like stuff like that, like she talked to us like straight, like how Robin Williams talked to his students and like gave us like real life advice and like all this other stuff. So yeah, at first, like it's weird because you know which teachers you can and can't do those things with.
Yeah.
And so then it's like weird because you're in these other teachers' classrooms. You're like, okay, I'm listening. I'm being obedient. Like I'm following the rules. My uniform looks perfect. Like I'm not talking in class, blah, blah. And then it's like I would get to Miss Terragrosa's class and it'd be like,
you can breathe. You can let your hair down a little bit.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Exactly. At first you're taken back, but then you're like, oh wait, I can trust you?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Well, one thing too, as you were saying that kind of reminded me of was these kids, they're kind of looking for someone to show them beyond the structure and the world of which they know. Like they're in this thing, but just going through the motions of it. They're not actually living their lives. They're just doing the thing to get the thing later on. A means to an end. And what's interesting, and I might be looking too much into this, but Mr. Keating's like non-traditional ways of teaching, so like standing on the desk, like having them go outside, or when he crouches down low and tells like whatever, they all kind of like slowly go to his level no matter what it is.
Right.
And it's a cool representation of them finally getting to understand that like they can test those boundaries and they can also be free thinkers and think that way too, but they do it on their own free will. The point of like everything of him crouching down, they would slowly like crouch down to his level because they were so inspired by him and they want to understand, what he's trying to say and just be closer to him.
And I think it's that exact same thing. Like once that boundary of safety was established, that like Mr. Keating was like, no, get on the table. It's okay.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I'm saying? Like once that safety for them was established, the kids were like, all right, okay, it's go time. Like they were like, we're for, like, it's that same moment.
Yeah.
I think also there's a really big role for Mr. Keating in Todd.
Yeah.
Because Todd never was shown that his voice mattered. Like, and that's something he said like over and over again. He said it to Neil. He says it all the time. He's like, why even say anything? My voice doesn't matter. Like, you can tell it doesn't matter in his family life. You can tell it doesn't matter in his friend group. Like, just the whole, every facet of his life, his voice has never been heard. So when he goes into Mr. Keating's class, Mr. Keating is like this person who can just kind of like read the room and read the energy. He can look at Todd and be like, you are boiling with words, but you just won't fucking speak. We're going to get you to talk.
Yeah.
And so there's this scene where he has to stand up and do poetry. Mr. Keating gave an assignment. All right, everybody get up there. Come Monday, you need to have a piece of poetry ready. You're going to stand up in front of the class. And he immediately goes, Todd, I know you're dying on the inside. Get over it. You got to do it. And Todd's like, fucking shit. All right, whatever. So Monday morning rolls around and it's Todd's turn. And he's like, oh, I didn't do the assignment. Thinking like, all right, well, I can't get up there, but I didn't do the assignment. Haha. And
joke's on you.
Mr. Keating's like, we're going to get you to talk because I know you have enough feelings inside of you that you're going to explode some way, shape, or form.
I know.
And the moment of Mr. Keating, he starts like getting him to yell and rallying him up and spinning him in a circle. And then he shuts his eyes and like, he's just throwing all of this like stimulation at him mentally, even though his eyes are shut. And he's just like, tell me what you think. Tell me what you're seeing. What are you seeing? What are you feeling? And like, all of a sudden, Todd just spits out this poetry piece that's like
beautiful,
referencing, yes. And I thought I think it's ironic because he references like a big scary man, and all of a sudden he's choking him and he can't breathe, and he's like an infant again, helpless and useless, and then all of a sudden there's a blanket, but the blanket's not big enough. You'll never be able to fit. No matter how you stretch it or pull it, the blanket will never cover you. It'll just cover your eyes and whatever. And it's this totally emotional piece. I started crying in the movie, and I was like, what just happened? But I think it's also so symbolic because I think that reference that he just spit out in front of all of his classmates is actually how he feels internally.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Like the reference to the big scary guy choking him, suffocating him, whatever, that's the high school itself, like putting on this pressure, putting on this strict rigidity that he doesn't want. And then having this blanket that'll never cover him, it'll never be enough. And that could be his voice. That could be his self-efficacy. That could be all these facets of him that he feels aren't enough. Mm-hmm. And then you're just left to sit there and cry and be alone. And that's how the poem ends. And the whole class is sitting there, crickets.
Yeah, they're like, is this guy good?
And Mr. Keating just like slow claps and he was like, you're a poet. And after that, it was just like, Todd was like, okay. So this whole voice thing might work. And I feel like that sets the tone and like sprinkles like a little seed of hope for later.
Yeah. And he still struggles with it later on to the point where it literally had me screaming at my TV. I was like, you better say something now, because if you don't, oh my, cause I don't know.
Yeah.
I forgot if we said this in the beginning, but Anna and I both, for some reason, have seen this before and blocked out like some of the major plot points of what happens in this movie. So I was basically
we blocked out the major plot point.
Right. I was just like they stand on desks and they think he's a good captain. Yeah, I love this movie. And then I forgot, the whole freaking meaning of it. Yeah, definitely forgot about that.
Yep.
So anyway, like you see him struggle with it, and at one point, Mr. Keating says this really amazing line that it just like it really like resonated with me, because I feel like there's a lot of times throughout my life where I struggle to find my voice, and there are times and situations where I feel like I have a voice, and other times I don't. And he basically says, boys, you have to strive to find your own voice, because the longer you wait to begin, the less likely you are to find it at all.
Yep.
And I just like sat there and I was just like, ugh.
Yep.
And he also said something along the lines of like, in poetry, like you all contribute a verse, what will it be? So not only the importance of finding your voice, but standing behind it and doing it because you seek it, not because of what someone else deems your path to be, which we see with Neil and his very overbearing dad that in the very beginning makes him cut an extracurricular. You know, it's kind of like the stereotypical, like, this is your dream, dad, not mine, that you see in, like, so many, like, Disney movies. But it was done way better than that.
Yeah, no, way better. Just because it was done way better because of the institution that it was at.
Yes.
It was this whole thing of, like, the conformity of being there and the pressure and the standard and the excellence and the honor and the this and the that. It was like, literally, I was like looking at some of that shit and I'd be like, they are literally, these young boys are literally standing at like parade rest when talking to leadership I'm like, is this a military academy or is this like a fucking high school? Because I couldn't tell the difference.
Oh my God. And to be fair, I think that was the time too. I think this was set in set in 1959.
60.
Yeah. So scary, very strict, rigid times. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like in terms of like the voice part, I don't know if you've ever felt this way, but I also think people feel like having a voice means that you need to be like the loudest person in the room. And that's not the case at all. I think it's just more so aligned with knowing who you are and what you stand for, and in having strong enough beliefs in yourself that no matter what comes your way, you're still like stronger than that. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that, but.
No, totally agree. I think I don't think I personally found any voice as a human being until maybe last year, my 25, I hit 25, and then all of a sudden I was just like, I am fucking done being a goddamn doormat. And I think it takes like a moment like this. I think it takes a moment like that, or a moment like a Mr. Keating, of an individual who shows you it's okay to have a voice. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Because like the people who don't have voices and who don't share and who don't stick up for things, it's because they've been told they can't.
Exactly.
Or they shouldn't. Yeah. Or whatever. And so until you're given that permission, and thank God mine was like internal permission, because I finally was just like, get the fuck up, say something. Yeah. Now it's like, it's funny. I feel like I'm the opposite now. I have a hyper.
Right. You're making up for lost time.
Fixation where like I see somebody like pull their dog the wrong way on the street. I'm like, hey, no, like something, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like, I think now I have like this overbearing duty to just fucking speak up to make up for it. Yeah. So to reference something that Dakota already said, where we have to start looking at things from a different perspective. I think that that's Mr. Keating's entire overarching theme of why he's teaching this, because you said it before, you can have these aspects of defiance or go against the grain and still find excellence or whatever. Yeah. And I think that's exactly what Mr. Keating's trying to do. So when he's literally standing there on top of the desk, like whatever, it came to me, I was like, okay, he's symbolically also trying to show them that like this education that they're receiving, they need to look at it differently. It isn't supposed to be this painful excursion that they're going to go on for 4 years to then just graduate and become doctors and whatever. Like, they have to start looking at it differently and growing up and finding who they are as a character to be a successful person there. And then I also had a huge revelation as well, that I was like, well, that's also why he loves poetry. And then that's why I fell in love with poetry to begin with as a kid. Yeah. Poetry allows you to look at the like a simple like piece of literature, a simple piece of artwork from way back when, and it means something so different to so many different people. Mm-hmm. Like you and I could read the same poetry piece and I could walk away from it being like, oh my God, like, wow, that was so meaningful, whatever. You could read it and being like, oh my God, that applied to XYZ that happened to me with 10 years ago. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So I think it's interesting because the whole theme of it, like their education, who they are as people, and plus the physical poetry itself, like all has to be looked at from outside the box in order to truly understand it. Mm-hmm.
And that ties into another quote that I loved that Mr. Keating said about poetry. Because I think too, and I actually kind of appreciated this, because there are kids in the class that aren't like really all about Mr. Keating, and they're not really into the whole self-expression, whatever. They're just like, cool, we don't have to do real work. Love it. Great. Because I think that's important, because it would be really cheesy if everybody was just like, oh my God, I love this teacher. Yeah. Like whatever. Mm-hmm. But he's talking about poetry, and he says, we don't read and write poetry because it's cute. We read and write poetry because we are members of the human race. And the human race is filled with passion. And medicine, law, business, engineering, these are noble pursuits and necessary to sustain life. But poetry, beauty, romance, love, these are what we stay alive for.
Oh, you said it so well.
Yeah. But I mean, he said it so well because it's so true. I mean, like you have those things that I think all these kids are set up to be: doctors, engineers, businessmen. Ugh. Like that's the whole reason why they're going to such a structured school, is because it's the name, it's the label that's attached to it that helps them get to the next step in their life. But there's so much more to life than just these noble pursuits. And you have like the big cores of like, yes, like you need a successful job to have, financial success, to set up for your life and to get the things that you want. But like all those things that fill the gaps are like, love, poetry, beauty, all those things are what fill in the gaps and make a complete whole life. It's not half and half. It's not
right.
one or the other. It all blends to be like one whole existence, you know?
Yes. Yes. And I think that specific aspect actually ties into a very particular character, cough, cough, Neil's father. In the end, you can tell that he has lived a life of such harsh rigidity that, like, in my opinion, I saw no emotional regard or remorse in the very end of the movie. So, like, as this movie progresses, right, the young kids go inside the archives of the school or whatever. They dig up an old yearbook, essentially, that was Mr. Keating's class, and in it they see like all of the previous members. They wrote like little notes, like, you know how you have your like senior quote or whatever next to your picture or whatever.
Yeah.
So Mr. Keating has something written. It's like a piece of poetry, and then it says something like signed the Dead Poet Society. And the kids are all intrigued. And so they go, they show Mr. Keating. They're like, oh, so like, what is this all about? And that's when Mr. Keating's like, well, me and a group of my friends don't ever tell anybody. But back when we were your age and students here, we would meet up in the forest and let poetry drip from our tongues like honey. And he says this whole like thematic like description of how they go and would meet up and just express themselves. Some of them would speak poetry, read, just interpret. Some would write their own. Others would play music. Like, it was just a moment for them to get outside the school and be themselves. And obviously, Mr. Keating, being the poet and like literature lover he is, he tied it back to the theme of, you know, the class that he's teaching in English. Yeah. So he tells these kids about it, and he's like, all right, hush, hush, don't ever bring it up again. And the kids take it upon themselves to essentially reignite the Dead Poet Society, right? Yeah. And so the first Friday night, they take the book that, you know, Mr. Keating essentially read, and it was even signed like the Dead Poet Society, the original group members. They would read a piece of it. It was from the great 5 authors of, you know, poetic history, and they tried it out. They were like, all right, let's just go. And ultimately, at first, it was like awkward. They were like, all right, what do we do? Do we read like something? And then all of a sudden, the kids start like falling in love with trying to express themselves, and like one kid writes something of his own, and they're like, whoa, wait, you wrote that? Whoa. Like, another kid brings out a saxophone, and it starts to become this experience for them, where they bond as friends, they bond as humans, they bond emotionally because of their outlet that they're now creating, and like it's starting to carry over into their everyday life. Like, Neil all of a sudden is like, oh, there's an opportunity, like, I'm gonna take this opportunity. He sees like a poster in the school ad saying like, hey, there's a free casting call for the play that's going on. We're putting on A Midsummer Night's Dream. Anyone want to come? Like, whatever. So it starts to just finally peel back the layers of these kids, and starts to peel back the layers of the rigidity that the school has fucking crowded them with. And then that starts setting up the whole pace of the movie, because we're seeing these kids now wanting to be different.
Yeah. Like you had mentioned earlier, it's just, and I don't think it was intentional in the sense of like Mr. Keating was like, oh, like I'm gonna plot to get, you know, these kids to do things that they've never thought before, but basically just sets the stage saying like, you can, like, Mr. Keating did come from this school. He was a student here, and now he's a professor, and now he's teaching in a way that hasn't been taught before. So allowing them to, you know, be free thinkers, to seize the day, encouraging them to live their life. And one of the things that he says is just words and ideas can change the world. And I absolutely love that. And I think it's so true, because his words and his ideas changed that, you know, all those kids' lives and eventually their world. And
truly their world.
Their world. And there is one part that, because there's so many characters in this, it's kind of hard to like talk about each one, but there is one storyline with a character named Knox Overstreet.
Yes.
And he has this like romantic interest, because basically in the very beginning he's called to this like fancy dinner at somebody's house who was like an alum, I believe. And
it was the Barringtons.
Yes. And
just, even the names sound prestigious.
Yeah, oh my god, it's ridiculous. And so he goes, and he's just expecting to talk with a bunch of old people and calling it a day, and this like beautiful girl opens the door, and he's like flabbergasted, and he can't stop thinking about her, except she's got a boyfriend, but he's like a jock and a jerk and you know, kind of love story that you see a lot in like high school, you know, movies or whatever. But the thing that I loved so much about this is he eventually, because of Mr. Keating's inspiration, he decides that he's just going to do it anyway, because he knows this guy's a jerk and he knows he can be better. He's not forcing her into anything. Like, he's not being, like, aggressive, like, you need to go out with me. Like, he's just this is who I am, and I really like you for who you are. Like, if you want to give me a shot, like, I would make it worth your while. And at one point, he really wants to call her, and he's like, you know what? I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to call her, and I'm going to see what happens. And he ends up calling her, and she was like, oh, I actually wanted to ask if you wanted to go to this party. And it was, so basically he takes this risk, and it ends up paying off, even though she was thinking about him, and it was a whole thought of him anyway, which was like what really made his while. And it's just their whole romantic pursuit is kind of like whatever. He tries to shoot his shot. He gets beat up. Doesn't really work out. He shows up at her high school with flowers. Like he's very persistent. Yeah. I will give him that. But he eventually like just told her like, look, like I love you, which is kind of crazy. But you know,
so aggressive.
Young kid in love. What are you gonna do? You feel things 100 times more than what they actually are. But
ain't that the truth?
Yeah. And so you know he confesses his love to her, and you know whatever, and he goes back to his friends, and he's like, yeah, I told her, I told her that I loved her, and they're like, so what'd she say? And he goes, nah, it doesn't really matter what she said. I did the thing. And he's like happy with it, and he like skips away, and they're all like, oh man, what the heck? But I think it's a good point of like doing the thing that scares you, even if the outcome doesn't work in the way that you wanted it to. Just being able to say, you know what, I put myself out there. I went for that thing, even though I didn't get what I wanted. Right. And finding peace in that and being okay with it. Like, I wish I could get more comfortable with that, but it's something I think we all strive to do as human beings, but I don't think we do it enough. I don't think we're so scared that we put ourselves in this little box because we're just more comfortable with what we know, that we don't ever like open a window and like look outside. So I don't know. I just thought that like small moment of like, it doesn't matter what she said, I did the thing. That's such a good place to be in. And I hope someday I can be more comfortable in that place of just being like, I did it. Oh, well, like whatever.
I don't care about the outcome.
Yeah. Meanwhile
I'm sitting there calculating like
absolutely every move.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, me too. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it's also important because the entire time he was sitting there contemplating doing the thing, he literally said to himself like 10 times, Carpe diem,
carpe diem,
carpe diem, carpe diem. Because he just heard Mr. Keating's voice in the back of his head the whole time being like, we got to do it one day. You got to do something.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And I think that for the kids that didn't essentially carpe the diem or whatever, or say the thing or do the thing, this whole movie kind of expresses like how it emotionally for you as a human being, it's going to take a toll. Like you can't put yourself in the box for the rest of your life. You need to eventually break out. And I think that's one of the biggest things I wrote down after watching it. I said that I think the human desire for expression is incredible. And I think it's interesting to see how Mr. Keating ties this poetry in as an example. It's so interesting because some of the greats of all time, throughout all of poetry and history and literature and stuff like that, they came from a time where it was even worse.
I know.
Of a strict, rigid, patriarchal society that was just like, you're a king and a queen and whatever. You know what I'm saying? So it's so interesting to show that these are the five greats. They came from a time worse than you. Worse than the expression that you're allotted here.
Yeah.
And they were able to create such beauty.
Yeah.
And so I think Mr. Keating tries to use that and then be like, you now have to do it.
Yeah.
And so for the kids that unfortunately didn't get to do it, like Neil, who he goes to audition for this Midsummer Night's Dream, and his roommate Todd is like, bro, your father gonna murder you. What are you doing? He's like, it's fine. My dad doesn't have to know. My dad doesn't have to know.
Yeah, in denial,
well,
yeah.
Right. And so obviously the time comes. It's the day before the play. And who shows up? His dad. His dad shows up in his dorm room and is like, I don't give a shit if the world ends tomorrow. You are not participating in this acting bullshit of yours.
Yeah.
And he's broken. He's broken. And he has a moment and you could just see it in his eyes. He was such a good actor that like he's about to say it. He's about to finally express himself. And then he's like, yes, sir.
Yeah.
And nothing. And nothing. Like you see him boil up in his face and the vein pop in the forehead that he's like about to say it. And then he's like, yes, sir. And both times I was like, oh my God.
I was like, just say how you feel.
Yeah, seriously. And so like eventually, you know, he goes up to Mr. Keating. He's crying and he's like, dude, what do I do? Like, I can't express myself to my dad. I can't talk to him. I can't do anything. And Mr. Keating's like, what you're saying to me right now, you'd need to say to your father.
Yeah.
And he's like, you got to do it before the play. And he's like, well, the play's tomorrow. And he's like, well, then you better fucking do it
tonight.
before tomorrow.
Yeah.
In my head, I actually don't think he did it.
I don't think he did either. Yeah.
No.
I don't think he did.
Because if he truly did, I don't think... Okay, so this is my thought process here. If he truly did, for one, I don't think he would have... I don't think the father would have allowed it. That's my thing. I don't think the father would have allowed it at all. And then, secondarily, I don't think then afterwards, so the dad... So obviously, here's how it goes down. The next day in school, he goes up to Mr. Keating. He's like, yeah, I said it. I talked to my dad. He's like crying again because he's like, it didn't go well, like whatever.
Yeah.
And he's like, I'm able to do the show tonight, but like, that's it or whatever.
Yeah. And I don't think that that's what actually.
I didn't buy it.
No.
Because, so fast forward to the play goes phenomenally. Neil is like this fucking champion actor who's like been literally a hidden gem this whole time. Mm-hmm. And who walks in? Like the final scene, his father.
Right.
So the father doesn't even see the whole fucking performance.
Right.
Sees his son performing, literally like immediately after the show is like, get in the car, we're leaving. And then like tells Mr. Keating off and then zooms home. He keeps saying like, why do you choose to keep defying us? So that's why I'm like, okay, he definitely didn't have the conversation.
No.
Because the father didn't obviously give permission. So I think he just was testing the boundaries and saying like, okay, this is me trying to shoot my shot. And like, maybe if my dad shows up and sees I'm really good, like maybe he'll let me be who I am.
Right.
But unfortunately it backfires.
Yeah. Yeah. And I kind of want to say spoiler alert, but also this movie's been out since 1989. So if you haven't seen it. So
I don't feel bad for you.
Yeah. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. And if you have, then you know what we're probably going to dive into next. Because unfortunately, it is that point of no return where he has finally tried to prove himself. And instead of talking to his dad, to show his dad. And
yes.
Neil realizes at that point that I'm not enough because I showed you me. I showed you a part of me that is so real and kind of like a spiritual part of makeup of who he is and what he wants and what he's dreaming of doing. And his dad basically is like, so what you pulled tonight will never happen again. We're sending you to military school. We're taking you away from all of your friends. Like, go to sleep, like whatever. Ruins his life in a matter of like 2 minutes.
2 minutes, truly. And he also outlined that he outlined the next 10 years of his life. And that's something to keep important in your head because Neil literally goes, Dad, that's a lifetime.
Yeah.
He, from that moment on, knew he no longer had a choice for the rest of his life.
Yeah. Because unfortunately, where do you draw the line after that? Where do you, if someone's been making decisions for you up until way after you're like 18 years old, where does the line stop? It doesn't stop there. Yeah. So either you go along with it and have a miserable life and always wonder, what if I had done this? What if my life would have been like? Or you have the other end where you defy the parents and you don't have the support and you're solely left on your own, which is a terrifying thing. I think a lot of the times, myself included, like parental approval is huge for a lot of kids. And I mean, it's a lot for adults as well, parental approval. So the thought of being exiled or excommunicated from the people who brought you into this world and gave you life is a terrifying thing. And it's not as easy as just being like, well, screw that. You know, and in the same fashion of what we were talking about, I think with emotions, and obviously these kids are high school age, you feel things to such a higher degree that everything feels so much more like a death sentence. And I've been there where I've genuinely been like, what's the point? Like something bad happens and I'm like, this is the worst thing that could have ever happened to me. And, you know, he decides to take his own life and he's successful in that. And that is, for whatever reason, the part that I forgot. And as soon as he was standing by the window and just breathing in the cold winter air, I was like, nuh-uh. I was like, nope. Yes. I was like, he's going to do it. Nuh-uh. Mm-mm.
Yes. I think there are a bunch of symbolisms that play out the lead up to him taking his life. For one, he opens the window, he looks and he breathes in the air. And I think he also lets his spirit go.
Yeah.
And that's that moment. That was like that moment of decision, you know?
Yeah.
And he put on that crown and he was like, this is who I'm meant to be. And he's letting that portion of him go because the portion of him that's about to take his own life is not the real him, you know? The real him was tonight on that stage wearing that crown, and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the next thing that happens is like he has to sneak into his dad's office to take his dad had a gun, essentially. And so there are multiple facets of boundaries and barriers that he had to get through. And for me, this was my thought process. Like watching Neil have to sneak out of his bedroom, sneak past his parents' room, open the office door without his dad knowing, finding the key, opening the drawer, and then committing the act. Those are 5 obstacles that he had to face just to even get to the point. Now imagine if he had gotten caught at any stage of that obstacle, his father would have beat him senseless. But all of those obstacles and the fear and the thought and the anxiety of getting caught, even pursuing this little venture of his, was worth in the end. Like taking his own life was more worth it than getting caught at any of those 5 obstacles. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like for me, I was just like, wow, okay, there's so many barriers and boundaries for him to not take his life here. Like his
so many opportunities for him to like stop and reconsider, and he's just yeah.
And he is like, no, I don't care if my dad catches me, whatever. If I make noise, whatever. Like I'm doing it, and so he does it. This part hit me the hardest. So obviously, it actually wasn't the act of him doing it. It was what ensued after.
Oh, yeah.
So the dad bursts awake and is like, what was that noise? And the mom's like, what noise? Homegirl, your son would have been dead for hours if you fucking were the only
Talk
one
about
home
heavy
alone.
sleeper.
No offense. Like legitimately, you're not okay.
Okay.
Anyway.
Well, we knew she wasn't okay because she was like sitting while her husband was berating her son, ruining his life. And she's like, just go get some sleep, honey. Like, screw you.
No, I agree. Oh my God, stop. We can have an hour-long conversation on her. She needs to get her life decisions realigned.
Welcome to the 60s. Uh-oh.
Right. And in times like that, women didn't work. And so he's the breadwinner. So what are you going to do? Tell him, no, you can't send our son to a military academy that you're going to be paying for while I sit my ass home and cook. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, it just, that's unfortunately the time.
Yeah.
But anyway, so they rushed to Neil because they finally like pieced together like, holy fucking shit. Because they didn't even see him. He was behind his dad's desk.
Right.
And they pieced together like, oh my God, he's shot, like whatever. She's wailing, my son, my baby, he's okay, no, he's probably okay, whatever. And the husband, his words are, stop it, to the mother.
Yeah.
I was literally like in a moment where you fucking did this, bro. You
didn't pull the trigger, but you were the one who pushed him to it. Yeah.
Right. This was my biggest question, and like I struggle with it as well. As human beings, why is it so hard to admit when we're wrong?
Oh my God.
Because even in this moment, his son is dead on the floor in his arms, and he wouldn't admit his fault.
I think he knew he was wrong though. It's like,
oh God, yeah,
he knew it. It's just, I think it's such a deeper truth when you have to admit it to yourself. Mm-hmm. And the same thing that I think we talk about this every single episode of like the perception is your reality. So like you have to basically come to terms that I'm the one who did this, or I was the one who was at fault. I was the one who did that. And it's much easier to put the blame on somebody else because then you can go to sleep at night and you don't have to worry about the choices that you made or think anything about it more than 2 minutes. Because it's just the hard route. It's the hard route. And I think people would rather bury themselves in other activities as distractions than to really come to terms with the hard work that not only accepting it, but then like, what do you do after that? Because sure, I mean, for the most part, like with me personally, I can admit when I'm wrong. I mean, it depends on what it is. I think naturally I get very defensive on certain things.
Oh, me too. Yeah.
But if I'm given the time to like step away from a situation and to like have my own personal alone time, I don't know if that's because I'm an only child, but I got to process things on my own. I do. I literally have to be in a room by myself and just like think about it and just like be quiet for a little while. And then I can come back, apologize, and admit when I'm wrong. It would have to be something pretty serious for me to not eventually come to that conclusion. But when it's something as serious as this situation, it's got to be the denial, because if he accepts it, then his son is really gone. And then it wasn't even like his son's future. It was also the dad's future, I think, that he...
Yes.
So it's not... He lost his son's future and the future of himself at this point. So...
Right.
And then they continue to blame Mr. Keating after that.
Oh, God. Yes. So not only do they blame Mr. Keating, but I was going to add to that. I also now think that the family name is like tainted because like your son's the one that he took his own life. Like that's so against all the values we've ever taught. Like, you know what I'm saying? It's like that was the ultimate act of defiance that you could have ever done.
Yeah.
Because it's truly irreversible. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so true, so true.
After that, they obviously go to school, and the school's like having an investigation because the parents are like, it's fucking Mr. Keating. It's this Dead Poets Society. They're blaming 6 Ways from Sunday but themselves. And it's really sad. Oh, sorry.
I never heard that. That was good.
Oh, really? Yeah, no, it's good.
You have some amazing,
okay.
You've got some amazing catchphrases. I learned so much from you.
Thanks. But yeah, I just think that the next scene that followed crushed me even further because it wasn't actually his parents' reaction, it was his friend's reaction.
Dude.
Because when Todd finds out and starts finally breaking down, I lost my shit.
Yep.
And he was like, no, he wouldn't leave us. Because that group of boys finally found themselves in each other. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so now to have one of them gone, it's truly a piece of them gone.
Yeah.
Because this was the first time in their lifetimes that they've been themselves and that they were seen for who they want to be seen as. You know what I'm saying? And so for one of them to have that happen, and especially for poor Todd, it was his roommate and best friend and the person who pushed him to be out of his shell. You know, it was a moment like this where he was just like, out of all people, out of all things, this is not okay to be happening.
Yeah.
And Todd, unfortunately, now has this burden of truth on him because he knows the whole situation with the dad, whereas nobody else knows that. So the whole school, everybody's so quick and easy to blame Mr. Keating, obviously except for the boys in the Dead Poets Society, but now it's awkwardly on Todd. And will Todd do it? I don't know.
This is when I screamed at the TV. I literally did, and thank God I was home alone. I'm sure my neighbor downstairs was like, what the fuck? But because when they bring them in, all the boys in each at a time to basically get an idea of what happened. And by the time that Todd goes in, it's basically the decision's made and he has to just sign his name. Like his parents are there.
It was like the last person.
Yeah.
Like,
so at that point, he doesn't, once again, have room to have a voice. It's basically shut up, sign the paper, and move on with your life. And he's sitting there and he's like debating, and like the guy, I'm assuming it's like a headmaster or something, is explaining the situation. Oh, it's because of the Dead Poets Society, and now he's, you know, we're going to take this into our own hands, and it's the investigation and blah, blah, blah. So I just need you to sign or whatever. And you can just see it. It's such a beautiful way, but this like internal struggle. And it's like, I don't know how you can see it externally, but you can just see it and you can feel it.
Yeah.
And I am like sitting at the edge of my seat and I was like, say no! Like, what are you doing? Like literally I was like screaming at the TV, and he doesn't say anything. And it just cuts to them in the classroom. There's a teacher filling in for Mr. Keating, and Mr. Keating comes in to collect his things, and the new teacher is like, let's read the introduction to poetry, because that is the best way to be a poet and know the rules. And everyone's like, well, the pages are ripped out, so don't know what to tell you. Mm-hmm. And he's like, oh, we'll just read this, whatever. And like you can kind of see like Mr. Keating smirking in the back because he knows that that's just not how it should be.
Yeah.
And what he had taught them.
Yeah.
And you can just see Neil like bubbling up inside. He's just riddled with guilt, and he's just like constantly looking at Mr. Keating. He wants to make eye contact, but he doesn't want to. Like he's just like, oh, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And he finally, Mr. Keating, you know, grabs all his things and he's leaving, and he just stands up and he finally just like explodes. They made me do it. Like I couldn't, like I didn't want to. I know it wasn't you. Please, you have to believe me. And Mr. Keating's like, it's okay. Like I know. And yeah, he finally found his voice, but it was a little too late for it.
Yeah, too little too late for sure. I think one of the things that caught me here was the pages being ripped out of the book, right? I think that was a bigger symbol of essentially you can't unlearn now what the seed that Mr. Keating planted in them.
Yeah. Because
it's just like that page being in the book still. So like, let's say we pass that book to the next generation of students. Mm-hmm. They're going to see that first page. They're going to get wrapped right into the rules and regulations of poetry, follow the rigidity, fall into the trap again. Mm-hmm. But Mr. Keating removed the page.
Yeah.
He's like, no, it's gone out of the book now. We can't fucking put it back. Because every way you put it back, it's going to be wrong. It's never going to be the same.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a really good example for all these boys that were in that class. It was just like, you can't unteach that freedom that Mr. Keating gave them. You can't unlearn for the expression that was granted for them. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I thought it was such a bigger moment than him being like, all right, well, fuck it, turn to the next page, because it's not an option. Page 1's gone.
The impact is there.
There's been a new page 1 written. At the end of the day, at least fucking Todd found his voice and said something. Was it enough at the time? No, because it wasn't reversible, but I think the boys at the end banded together and they all stood on the desks because they now see it from a different perspective. And they kind of stood up for him in this like moment of gratitude, but also we're with you. And it was silent because they didn't need to say anything.
I mean, to me, that was just honor. You know what I mean? Like, that was the definition of honoring, of that final like pillar of, you know, the themes that we've been talking about. Honoring the person who allowed them to see the world in a different perspective. Oh, captain, my captain, honoring their captain.
Yes.
In the most beautiful way possible. And you even get to see like that one kid who was like not really about any of it and was kind of not like in an aggressive way defying it, but he kind of was defying it. He's like, you know what? I liked this guy. I'm going to stand up. And so he stands up on the desk too. And the teacher is like, get back down. Oh my God, what are you doing? It's like screaming at them or whatever. And they stand their ground because they found their voice finally.
Yes, they found their voice. I think, well, the movie essentially after that scene wraps up entirely. But there's like a few more things I feel like are really important to at least talk about a little bit. There's one scene we brushed past. It's in the process of Mr. Keating teaching them. And it's a really cool example. The boys are outside in the courtyard and Mr. Keating goes, you, Johnny, start walking. And he's like, okay, what? All right. So Johnny starts walking and he goes, all right, Charlie, join in. All right, Todd, you're next. And so now there's 3 guys walking. And at first they were all walking at a different pace. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden the boys started marching to the same cadence without anybody telling them to. And it's just a really good example that Mr. Keating was trying to show them that, like, listen, guys, when you're surrounded by all of this shit, it's really hard to push past and walk to your own beat. But this is what I'm showing you. You just saw a perfect example. 3 guys, they weren't even told to walk on the same beat.
It just happened.
And they did it subconsciously. Yeah. Because we're so afraid to be going against the grain, to be quote unquote defiant. But here in this institution, expression is the defiance.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something Mr. Keating was trying to teach, is that expression is absolutely okay. It's not defiance. It's just defiance here.
Yeah, and I think he also differentiates that later on. There's like a distinct moment where he tries to be a little too defiant, and I forget his name. We'll call him Charlie for now. It might be the wrong guy. But he basically tries to defy the odds and say that he wants like girls to come to the Welton Academy, which is an all-boys school. And it kind of gets to the point where it's a little too far. They have like a whole big assembly and like he submits something to the newspaper of the school and it gets published. And the guy's like, we're going to find out who did this and they're going to be in severe trouble, blah, 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 blah. And like all of a sudden a phone rings and everyone's like, what is going on? And that guy Charlie picks it up and he goes, oh, it's for you, like, sir. They say that it's God. It says that it's time for girls to come to Welton. And he gets punished for that. And even Mr. Keating gets a reprimand for that. And he's like, I see the way that you teach your class. Like, you need to be a little bit more structured about how you teach and encourage your kids to express themselves. And he puts it in a very delicate way because in this guy Charlie, and I hope it's Charlie, I don't know if it is, he's almost like proud of it. Like he's like pompous about, you know, he's just like, oh, like I did this thing, I stuck up to the man. And Robin Williams and Mr. Keating in a very delicate way says there's nothing wrong with doing that, but you have to do it, you have to find the right time to do it. Doesn't mean that you should do it all the time. And basically says if you keep doing it, then you won't be able to do things you enjoy, like coming to my class. And it's a personal thing of like, okay, you're right. Like, I do want to come to class. I don't want to be a jerk. So, yes, knowing when to push the envelope, knowing when to express and have your own voice and when it's time to, you know, pick and choose your battles, essentially.
Right. Pick and choose your battles, for sure. The only thing I wanted to touch on, I wanted to ask you if you have a favorite poet.
Do I have a favorite poet? I don't know. I mean, you showed me Christopher Poindexter back in college, and something about the way I know he's kind of on and off sometimes on social media. He's big on Instagram, but I don't know. It's something about the way he writes. Like there's every once in a while, like I read one of his poems and I'm just like, oh my God, how did you put that into words? You know?
Yes.
So I like him a
literally
lot.
captures the human emotion in writing.
Yeah. I will say I'm not very familiar with a lot of older, like classic. Obviously, I know like Edgar Allan Poe. I know like all those, types of poets, but I don't actually know a lot of their work. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So I wish I could say some older poets, but unfortunately, I know in here they quote a lot of Walt Whitman.
Oh my gosh, so much, yes.
It was like a
See,
Walt Whitman
but
story.
I have to admit, so I don't like, this is something that I gathered from being like growing up learning about poetry and shit like that. Like I thought of it as an expressive art form, like almost like a painting, and I felt as if poetry, I agree with Mr. Keating, rip that first fucking page out, because poetry, there's no ground rules. There shouldn't be, at least. So I was always a very big fan of like free verse poetry, and just like even brain dumping, like, and that could be poetry. Like anything could truly be poetry, and that's why I love it so much.
Yeah, I agree. Overall, what were your thoughts and, out of 5 rating for Dead Poet Society?
I'm not gonna lie, I think this one finally got a full 5 out of 5 for me. No 4.9 bullshit.
Yeah, I don't want no decimal shit. Get out of here. No, so it's funny. So when I first started watching the movie, I was like, yeah, I mean, I like this movie. It's like nostalgic because since I watched it in high school, I was like, I don't know why I like loved it like that much. Like, and then all those things unfolded and I was blubbering and I was like, oh, this is why I love this movie.
Yeah.
So 5 out of 5. And
yes.
I said it once, say it again. I probably said it 5 times. I really miss Robin Williams. He was like one of my favorite actors. And anytime I see him, it just like lights up my heart. So 5 out of 5 for Robin Williams, Dead Poet Society. Yes. Oh, Captain, my captain. He's my captain, I would say.
Honestly, well, I think that's why. I think if you watch this as a teen, you can very much so relate to those boys.
Yeah.
And I think I probably watched it same timing. I was like maybe like 18, 19. Mm-hmm. I think I watched it in college. But yeah, I was definitely going through a moment of like not carpe dieming.
Yeah. I mean,
and
it's hard.
Yeah,
it's hard. At least now you can look at it and be like, well, I can now seize the day. I can make my life extraordinary. I can find my voice. Because even though I know he says, like in that quote, that you might never find it at all or it might be too late, I still think that watching movies like these that are thought-provoking, which is also kind of like why I went into study what I study, is because I fell in love with movies and the way they tell stories and how you can just connect to them and how they inspire you to be a better person. And I think it's exactly what this movie does.
And at a minimum, at least take new opportunities.
Yeah, for sure. Don't be afraid to put yourself out there.
Don't be afraid to carpe that F and DM and do what you want and F the rest. How's that?
Do what you want. But once again, thank you guys for always listening and reaching out to us and interacting with us. Please don't forget to rate us or even give us a review on your favorite platform. We're available on a bunch of random ones, but the main ones, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts. I don't know. You can click the link in our Instagram bio, which is the.dna.podcast. So check us out, follow us, interact with us.
Yes. And if you do listen on Spotify, make sure that you look at the interactions for the episode, because we actually drop a couple questions for you guys to interact with you while you're listening to our episode. So we appreciate you clicking and listening, but also check it out. Look at the actual screen once in a while to answer some of those questions, because we would love your feedback and your input and all the things. And we do have actually a Gmail as well. A lot of people reach out to us on Instagram, but if you do want to send in a question or something specific or anything of that nature, we have a Gmail that you can reach out to. It's the.dna.podcast22@gmail.com.
Send us a question or don't, but like we would like it if you did.
Thanks for tuning in. We hope today's episode makes you feel a little bit more connected to your true self.
Don't forget to follow the DNA Podcast on Instagram so you never miss another episode.
Until next time.